Welcome to the Finance Garage podcast, your go-to podcast for navigating the world of finance. I'm Jonathan, your financial guide, bringing the latest market trends, investment strategies, and financial news that matters to you. And by the way, I'm also going to share my other passion, which is cars.
At the SWU Group, we help everyday families achieve financial success. Our integrated services include financial planning, accounting, credit advisory, and estate planning. We're here to guide and support you every step of the way, from custom investment strategies to maximizing tax efficiency. We ensure your financial goals are met with peace of mind. Visit simonwu.com.au for more information.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Finance Garage. As always, it's Jonathan Wu here, Senior Financial Advisor and Principal at the SW Group. And today we have another car guest, the second of which after Adam Morris from Redriven. And given how small the world is, my guest today does know Adam quite well, and they both come obviously from the same industry. But I'm here today with Matt Brand from CarSauce to discuss a very, very different topic, of which the topic is around the misunderstood threat of Chinese cars in Australia. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So to kick things off, Matt, can you give us a bit about, your background, because you don't actually come from an automotive journalist background, and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, exactly right. So my background is not journalism, and I was saying to you just before we started recording that I wouldn't call myself a journalist either, because I think that should be a protected term. I founded CarSauce, and my role title is founder. Honestly, I would call myself an expert on cars at this point, because I spend so much time in cars and in the industry, of course. But my background is not automotive. It's actually consulting. So started at KPMG in Big Four. That's where I started my career as a graduate. And then I went to Accenture in their in-house strategy team. And then I ended up at Melbourne Airport because I'm on top of loving cars, I really love planes as well. So that was a really cool in-house strategy role before I decided to go full-time into CarSauce. So CarSauce was something I started on the weekend, which was actually Matt Brand Cars back in the day. And I would just review family and friends' cars. And then it got to the point where it's at today, where we have 155,000 subscribers, 160,000 followers on TikTok. We pull a lot of views and a lot of eyeballs, and do a lot of traveling as well to cover all of these cars.
Fantastic. Now, today, obviously, we want to sort of talk through this, let's call it an issue. Let's be a little bit provocative. We all know that Chinese cars are shaking up the Australian market. And what we want to try to dissect today is whether or not this is a threat. Sharing a personal story. My wife drives a BMW X3. We were talking about just before you hit the record button, Matt. And hell or high water, I would not be able to convince her to buy, let alone drive, a Chinese car. Now, I generally have seen two buckets of fears of people with regards to Chinese cars and effectively their EVs. One is they're spying on me. Number two is build quality and safety. And so, let's sort of break this down, because we've got quite a number of brands now in the Australian market. We've got BYD, we've got MG, GWM, which is Great Wall, and a number of their derivatives, Chery and others. Mm-hmm. I mean, to kick things off, how do you broadly see their entrance into Australia?
I see it as a good thing overall, for sure. I think the more competition, the better. I don't think they're all going to survive. I think that we have a lot coming in that are going to test the waters and probably die. And I'm not saying that they will die globally, but it's a big reason that these car companies, these Chinese car companies, really any car company will come to Australia, even like a Cupra, for example, is because it's a great way to test the market before you go out to larger areas, specifically the Western market. So I see it as a good thing. It's like, from a personal point of view, it's exhausting because there are so many car brands launching. I think we've done recently, like in the last month, we've gotten Deepal, Geely, Leap Motor, and there's more to come as well that I'm sure I'm blanking on. But that's 3 brands already in 1 year is huge. To have it all in 1 month is just crazy. So it's a really interesting time to be doing what I'm doing and filming these cars. But I think overall, despite it, being bad for some, especially legacy brands, I think it's a really good thing.
I mean, if we sort of draw an analogy from, let's call it, going to say 100 odd years ago when GM was created in the United States, there's all these derivatives of GM, right? Cheaper to most expensive. A lot of them actually didn't survive.
Right.
Because you're trying to test the market. And, from an investment perspective, as a lot of people know, I'm an investment director with Antipodes Partners managing $9 billion. And we have a very clear view that we like to buy companies that have, they supply batteries or they supply semis or other inputs into the production of an EV, but we will never buy at this point in the cycle an actual EV manufacturer because we don't know who will survive because it's effectively a price war. And we'll get into that a bit later. How do you think, Matt, these companies and their approach, at least in the Australian market, is different from how the Japanese, Korean, and Europeans are doing it? Because even the Korean brands now, you could almost call them legacy within the context of this onslaught of Chinese brands, right? How do you see that and the approach?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing you'll notice with Chinese car companies is they don't stop with their R&D, and they don't stop with pushing the boundaries. And so you will see, for example, Nissan. I sent Jacob to a Nissan launch, and he one of the questions, or one of the things I think they just said out loud was that because they're struggling at the moment, Nissan, they are reducing the development time from, I think, 5 years for a update to 3 years, which is a huge difference for a legacy brand. And actually, when Hyundai first came and Kia first came, we were all shocked because they were releasing a facelift every 2 years. But in China, they will release a whole new generation within 1 year. And we've seen that with Zeekr, or a couple of years, Zeekr 001. They launched that in like 2022, and 2024, there was a brand new model. So it's pretty... like the pace of change and the hungerness of these Chinese EV companies is on another level. And I think that speaks to a few different things. One, it speaks to the competitiveness in the Chinese market. But also, to be honest, it really comes down to work ethic as well. No matter how you want to look at it, you have a look at the Korean car companies, for example. There was very much a culture of, you work 24 hours a day, and things have changed now where it's much more like there's a lot more labor laws, and there's a much bigger cultural push there to really go for better working conditions, which I'm absolutely all for. But in China, they still have a very much work is life kind of thing. So the drive and the push is really what is accelerating this, and other car companies can't keep up. So that's why you'll have like Toyotas of this world who really rely on the reputation of their brand to make sure that they are ahead. But you don't have that with, what is a Zeekr? No one knows. No one has an affinity towards it. So they've really got to try hard to do it in other ways, which comes back again to that whole point of price, which is that these car companies are willing to not make any money in order to grow out their brands, very much like an investment.
Yes. I mean, speaking about Zeekr, I do feel that particular brand in of itself did not choose the best name to be a car brand, given its close derivative of being a virus.
Yeah,
that can kill a lot of people.
That is true. And then you have Zeekr 100%. You got Deepal, which just literally to anyone you ask would think that's an Indian name.
Correct.
It's a really bad name for any car company because it doesn't have a good associate. I'm saying it doesn't have a good association in terms of its name doesn't represent what it is.
Yes.
So it's just really confusing, and a lot of these manufacturers realize this now. GWM is a classic example where they've spun off so many brands. They realize that the marketing investment they have to make to promote each one of these brands is stupid compared to if they just had to do one brand, which was GWM. And so they're actually homologating, and we've seen that very recently. I think within the last week, Lynk & Co., which this is going to be very confusing, but Lynk & Co., was spun off from Lynk & Co. So the Zeekr X actually looks like a Lynk & Co. car. It's got the face of a Lynk & Co. car. Same with their Zeekr 009. However, now, because Zeekr has been more successful than Lynk & Co., Lynk & Co. is actually going into Zeekr. So even though Zeekr came from Lynk & Co., Lynk & Co. is now dead and part of Zeekr. It's just really confusing and frankly dumb. And they're recognizing this now.
It's to a certain extent because of the speed of change, I guess. They're sort of almost to a certain extent having to make it up as they go, depending on what the conditions, I guess, play out to be. I guess the one interesting thing, and I draw this to personal experience that I had, let's see, 2012, which makes that 13 years ago. I drove a BYD in 2012. It was an internal combustion in Shanghai, and it was almost like a ripped-off version of a Commodore. That's sort of how it felt. It had a lot of parts that shared with a Commodore back then. It was terrible. Like, it was genuinely terrible. And why I sort of share that story is I think the Chinese quite quickly came to a conclusion why they've sort of leapfrogged ICE cars is because there's almost no value add. It's like we're now at iPhone, whatever, 16. There's not that much more you can do to hit peak smartphone, right? In the same way, there's not a heck of a lot you can do to hit peak ICE. We're pretty much at peak ICE for a number of years. So why they just went, well, let's just pull all our resources and hundreds of $billions into EVs instead. Now, one of the obvious issues that leads to European brands is that this year, and I've watched a number of other guys, including the Electric Viking, who I think he's Australian, and he's discussed a lot about the German manufacturers, especially VW. They're closing 3 factories, and there's riots and stuff like that because it's unsustainable as a business. I mean, do you think the European brands are really up for an identity crisis now because they still got to do 2 things? Even Porsche's recently turned around and said, wow, that Macan EV is not selling well at all. Maybe we have to actually take the Macan EV platform that we built with shares with Audi and put it back in an ICE engine into it. Like, that's a pretty clear identity crisis, but it's like moving the Titanic.
Yeah, it's really interesting, again, of off-record discussions I've had with these manufacturers when I've been to Germany. So the way that these European legacy manufacturers, we would call them now, perform or work is that they plan 5 to 10 years ahead. So the car you see in 5 years' time is already designed. It's pretty much ready to go. It's like a rolling thing. So 10 years ago, they thought that in 10 years, the world will be electric. Every car will be electric. The pace of uptake has been far, far, far slower than they expected. And so, yes, you have brands like Mercedes with their C63 SE going hybrid 4-cylinder that people actually don't want. They don't want that. And I'm driving the Macan Electric now. It is a really good car. You don't have that feeling of the 6-cylinder. You don't have the feeling of the rumble of the engine, and you're spending about 50% more. And so people are actually like, hang on, actually, I don't really want to go EV yet, or I want to have a stepgap with a plug-in hybrid, for example. So yeah, there's real, I think a lot of these, especially European manufacturers, have kind of had am I allowed to swear on your podcast? Light swearing? They've had a bit of an oh shit, because they're like, what we expected to happen, what we planned to happen, has not happened. And so that's why, like you said, you have all these manufacturers actually going back on what they've said. You know, we've heard rumors now that they're going to put the V8 back in the C63. You know, we are, I think we're seeing a lot of like, actually the world isn't going full EV anytime soon, at least not by 2030, which is when a lot of people thought. And then, of course, you do have wild cards thrown in, like with Donald Trump coming in and his removal of EV subsidies. So that is a clear step backwards in going fully EV. And so who knows how much that delays it, or if there is just a cultural shift and no longer will the world be fully EV. Maybe synthetic fuels are the future. Like, it's such an interesting and volatile time that it's almost like you can't plan for 5 years ahead, because who knows?
Correct. Now, let's talk about this price versus quality debate. There was an analogy that was played to me recently where we said, obviously, I think I think still is in Australia at least, the largest battery you can put in your house is 10 kilowatt hours. And I think it's because of the fact that, electrical fires and stuff like that limit the capacity issues. And I was thinking, to put a Tesla battery in and the installation, it's like 12 to 15 grand or something, right? And so that assumes you've got the solar cells on the roof, and then, you suck it in and then you store the energy. Like my Porsche's got a 25 kilowatt hour battery. So it's 2.5x that. And that's a plug-in hybrid. And I was thinking, why did I just buy a BYD Dolphin, who probably has something like closer to a 50 kilowatt hour battery, buy what is now legal and a reverse transformer and plug the car into my house? Right.
Yeah.
And then find somewhere to charge it during the day. Talking about this price versus quality debate, are Chinese cars cheap for a reason, in your opinion, or is it an outdated perception, or is there some other X factor we don't know about?
There's a lot of reasons why Chinese EVs are coming in cheaper. I think a big reason is that they're not going for huge profit margins. They're going for quantity, not over quality, but quantity over the buffer they have in the price. So that's a big reason, number one. Number two is, and I've done a few Chinese factory tours now, you'll walk into a Chinese factory, there'll be maybe 100 people for 1,000 robots. And 3/4 of the factory operates in just darkness because there aren't people there. It's all done by machine. So what they've done is they have, because of their experience, frankly, in a lot of cases, ripping off a lot of other manufacturers, and in partnership with them a lot of the time as well, they've learned a lot. And so they have done things like take Tesla's gigacasting and are just doing it themselves. And so they're able to pump out just a huge volume of cars, more so than other manufacturers. There is also the fact that labor costs are lower in China. There is no doubt about that. But really, the quality, when you get into a Chinese car, I have been in some Chinese cars that you sit in and you're like, wow, this is insanely good. The fit and finish is almost perfect. The quality of the materials are really high. You don't have crappy plastics all around. You have soft touch materials. I'm thinking to my Cherry Tiggo 4, I spent $26,990 on that car, and I really just wanted the cheapest SUV possible. I wanted the cheapest Chinese car so I could make content on it. And I got into it, and I hadn't seen it before. I bought it sight unseen. It hadn't even been released in Australia. By the time I got to it, it was brand new. And I was shocked. I've got 3 displays in there and they all work pretty flawlessly. I've got soft touch materials everywhere. So it's quite a quiet interior, especially for a $26,000 car. And also, like, if you look into the engine, for example, most Chinese manufacturers coming to Australia are just electric vehicles. But with my one, the engine is like European designed, and it's just built in China essentially. But Chery had outsourced the design of this to some really renowned, I can't remember the name, but engine manufacturer or designer. And so, yeah, it really comes down to the fact that they can produce a lot of cars in a really efficient manner. And obviously, so many of the materials are just there in China. So they have like a full supply chain vertical integration that allows them to do it so cheap, which is how Hyundai, by the way, were really cheap as well in the beginning. And people are saying the same things about Hyundai as they are about now Chery. It's like, how do they do it? It's not, black magic. They're just bringing in cars at a really low price. Because they own so much of the supply chain. It's very fascinating.
I mean, it draws an interesting analogy when I think Tesla's been in Australia for over a decade, I think now. And the comment that a lot of people have had, which I think maybe you or Adam had this comment, the Teslas that are built in the China Gigafactory are better quality than the ones that came from the United States. Like there were less panel gap issues and things like that. I think that's what you're referring to, right? Giga casting, and that quality is actually coming better from China.
It's strange. So yeah, this is something that Adam was telling me, and to be honest, I haven't verified it because I haven't sat in a US one, or at least I don't know if I've sat in a US one or a China built one. I'm quite certain all the ones I've sat in a Chinese built one. But look, the Tesla is a bit of an outcast in my opinion, or an outlier, I should say, because there are some quality issues with the Teslas I sat in from China. I don't think that's a China issue. I think that's just a Tesla production issue. But you are correct in saying that, like, I mean, so many cars now are actually just made in China and people don't realize. If you have a look at like Mini's electric cars, you know, the Aceman is built on a GWM factory line, but you get in it and it is quality. It is really good. And so, yeah, Chinese car companies have just taken the learnings of from working with these other manufacturers, potentially copying or stealing their designs, whatever. But they've redone it in such a way that it's often better now, better quality than what you'd find coming out of some European countries, which is something that people are going to be shocked to say. But I think Tim Cook once said it really well, which is like, the reason we produce things in China is not because it's cheaper. It's because in America, we might have one expert on this, but in China, they have thousands. So you just have like an insane amount of engineers and people with really a lot of talent, and they're all centralized in areas like Shenzhen and things where you can just get the information, get the things you need, and really streamline those processes. It's fascinating, and I do think that there is an element of xenophobia against it. And let's be honest, like politically wise, our countries do not see eye to eye. But if you take away the political nature of it and you just look at the objective truths, there are some really incredible manufacturing things going on in China that allow them to produce these cars at a really fast and frankly cheap rate.
I mean, in terms of in your opinion, seeing as many cars as you've seen, which brands do you think are most threatened by the Chinese onslaught as it stands, at least in Australia, if not what you may think globally?
At the moment, I don't think manufacturers that produce internal combustion engine cars have to be worried. Because most manufacturers from China, I'll be honest, don't produce the drivetrains, for example, that you'll get out of China just don't feel as good as what you'd find from traditional manufacturers who've been doing it for decades. So I think, you know, maybe at the lower end of the market, Kia and Hyundai are probably at the biggest threat. However, they're trying to differentiate themselves now by being premium. And this is what you're going to see from a lot of brands like Nissan. We're premium, which is their way of saying we're not like a cheap Chinese brand. We're for people who want a cheaper car, but not quite luxury levels. I think the real brands are going to struggle. And I think we're seeing this is like the Teslas of this world, where you've got full EVs and it's kind of like game on for these EV companies. Like this morning, we're breaking a story today, which is we spotted the Polestar 5 testing in Australia. But the rate of all these Polestars coming into the country, for example, and they're getting better and better is enormous. And it's not just Australia. When you look at globally, you know, I think it's a real shame, I have to say, that Europe are putting on tariffs on Chinese cars, because I genuinely believe that if they didn't, you would see Tesla struggling there as well. Not that I want Tesla to struggle, but I do want a free and fair market. That's what I like, especially someone who studied economics at university. You know, free trade is the best trade, generally speaking. So it's a shame that people in Europe are going to have higher prices artificially as a result. But yeah, in terms of like manufacturers, I think that it will struggle. You're really going to see those kind of newer entrants, I think, struggle, like Kia and Hyundai. And then, honestly, within China themselves, a lot of these car companies are not going to survive. You just have too many, and they're all very, very similar in how they perform.
Ready to take the first step in investing, or just looking to continue growing your wealth without being inundated with financial information? With SWU Online Invest, we offer a range of expertly managed portfolios designed to match your investment needs. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just getting started, know that we will work tirelessly to ensure your investments are strategically positioned to maximize your goals. Visit swuonlineinvest.com.au today.
Another one that sort of comes to mind that has tried very hard, maybe for the last 3 to 5 years, to try to leapfrog from being mass market to premium, which I don't think the sales numbers are really proven. And my uncle in Malaysia, who's a mechanic he worked for Mercedes and BMW and now Mazda. It's been very hard for Mazda to actually get into the premium space, their CX-60s and CX-90s. Do you think just the pure conception of people saying, well, Mazda's a mass market car makes it very difficult for some of these brands, including Nissan, to try to become premium and differentiate themselves?
Well, Mazda's an interesting one. They are struggling in their own way. So in Australia, we see Mazda as being huge because in Australia, I think they were the number 2 seller, at least they have been in previous years, like a massive market. But we are like their largest market. Globally speaking, Mazda is a really small car company. And so they develop cars at a snail's pace. A good example is the MX-5, that's probably been on sale for over a decade now. And the thing they do really well is they do make a premium feeling car and frankly a premium product at lower price ranges. But the CX range, or I should say I think they call it the large vehicle platform. So CX-60 to 90, that has not been a solid bet for them. There have been issues with it, with ride quality. They're very expensive in the grand scheme of things. And so the uptake of those vehicles has not been great. And therefore, I think that they're very much like a lot of these European manufacturers, that they made a bet and they were like, we're going to put all of our money into developing this and kind of halt the development of like the CX-3 and some of their more volume sellers, because this is where the money is. There is a lot more money in selling a premium car than there is in selling just a base shitter, frankly. And so they did that and it hasn't paid off, and their sales have not been great. And with all these regulations coming in, especially like in Australia with NVES, a lot of their cars are actually not even going to be allowed to be sold, or at least they'll be allowed to be sold, but they're going to have to buy a lot of environmental credits to offset the pollution of these vehicles. So they're between a rock and a hard place, especially since they actually completely betted against electric vehicles. They've had one electric vehicle, the MX-30, and that was an absolute flop. And so no one bought them. And they don't have any others at the moment, although they have done a deal with Deepal in China to make the Mazda 6e. And so that might be coming to Australia and the world. But it's just really interesting, the Mazda story, in that they've kind of gone the opposite way to a lot of these Chinese manufacturers. And that going too far the other way has actually had a really negative impact on them as well. Honestly, in my opinion, if they had just used that money to develop hybrid engines, they probably would have done far better, frankly.
Yeah. You talk about some level of drivetrain inferiority with the Chinese cars.
Yeah.
Dig into that a bit more, because electric cars, like I drive a plug-in hybrid Porsche, and you sort of, it's 0 and 1, right? Like you just press it down and it goes. Can you sort of dig into that? What's the drivetrain issues or concerns you have?
So this is just my personal opinion. I've driven a lot of Chinese vehicles at this point. You'll get into them, and when they have a combustion engine, often they can be a little unrefined in some way. They are a lot better than they were 10 years ago. But even now in my Cherry Tiggo 4, there are some irks about it that aren't great. For example, my biggest complaint, which is quite minor in the grand scheme of things, but it's the way that the ECU is calibrated. So the engine control unit, when I put my foot even like 20% down, it just cuts off the air conditioner. It doesn't actually need to do that. It's got enough power that it can have the air conditioning running and also the engine putting out a bit of power. But for some reason, it just cuts it out. It's a very similar story with the MG ZS Hybrid, which I broke a news story which was about the fact that I tried to reach 100 kilometers an hour in an MG ZS Hybrid. It took me like 28 seconds. And that's because there was a fundamental issue with the tuning of the drivetrain. The engine wasn't properly talking to the battery. And so it's just these small things that are actually really hard to get done right in a combustion engine that Chinese manufacturers typically don't do well. And this is a big, back to your point earlier, which is that like you drove a BYD back in China and it just didn't drive very well. If it's got an engine back in like 10 years ago in China, no one liked it. Not even the Chinese liked it. However, it's better now. But really, the ones that they do so well are electric cars, because they are a lot more simple in terms of their mechanisms. It's literally like an electric motor has like one moving part. So it's a lot easier to get that right than it is to do what is literally exploding dinosaurs and making sure that that works with the rest of the car. So, I guess I could say this as a Chinese car owner and as someone who's driven a lot of Chinese cars, they just don't do combustion engines incredibly well. I would say a European would make a better combustion engine in terms of how it drives. Can't talk about reliability, but in terms of how it drives, yes. However, with electric cars, Chinese brands do it so well. And the other thing they do is they actually take feedback and they will make the change within a few weeks. A good example is I went to a GWM launch for I can't remember what it was, but it was a GWM launch, and they actually flew down engineers, which is very common for Chinese car manufacturers, who sat there and through a translator, we were telling them all the issues we had with the car, and they were just like, oh, okay, yeah, okay. And then they went off and they made the changes. 2 weeks later, they updated it. So yeah, they're really fast and they don't delay like you'll find with a European car.
Now, given the cars are really cheap, let's talk about depreciation, because me and Adam also discussed this. Like, it doesn't matter what car. I think the only exception he found in the market, because obviously he specializes in the used car market, with the exception of the BYD Atto 3, everything depreciates like a stone.
Yes.
Is that, in your opinion, because fear of EVs, because it seems to be a global thing, not just an Australian thing? Everyone seems to be scared about the battery's going to implode after a couple of years, and therefore it's not worth it in the second-hand car market. How do you read into the plummeting depreciation? Because you've got to be mad to buy a new EV, right? Despite the price.
I think if you look at it from how you and I may look at it, which is an investment, it's a terrible investment, but most cars are terrible investments. But yeah, EVs are particularly bad. And I think there's a few reasons why. And I think it all comes down to perception. I mean, at the end of the day, so much about investment is perception. When you're buying an electric car today, you are essentially betting on next year they're not going to release solid state batteries, or the year after. And so, there is so much change and so much improvement within this. A lot of people are concerned that, oh my God, I'm going to buy an EV today. In 5 years' time, my battery capacity is going to be 50%. And then I'm going to have to replace my battery, and that's going to cost $40,000. And that's why EVs depreciate so much. And there definitely is an argument to be made that an EV is much more of an appliance than a combustion engine car. And I think that argument can be made because unlike a combustion engine car, which you could theoretically keep going forever, an EV, you are guaranteed to have battery degradation. That's it. You're guaranteed to have battery degradation. It's just part of the battery. And there could be better technology within a few years as well. But you're not going to get better technology for engines anytime soon. That's kind of been peaked for a long time. And in some ways it's worse now that we have turbochargers and all this complexity to reduce emissions. So I honestly think it just comes down to perception. I don't think it's because of quality of the cars or anything. It's just people are quite fearful. But then you do have a look at real world usage, and frankly, these Chinese EVs haven't been around in Australia for long enough. But if you have a look at like Teslas from 10 years ago, some of them still have like over 80% battery capacity. So they're actually degrading at a much lower rate than people expected, even Tesla expected. So you have to take everything with a grain of salt. And to be honest, in my opinion, I feel like in 5 years' time, maybe even 10 years' time, what's to say you're not going to be able to just get a new battery for a lot cheaper? Things like technology moves at such a fast pace. It's almost impossible to think about what is going to be the next big thing. But yeah, I think people are holding out for like solid state batteries and things like that. And then you do have the brand perceptions, which is something that Chinese car companies have not lost and they will not lose for a long time. But when Chery 10 years ago sold their car with asbestos in the fuel filler cap or whatever it was, that's going to have negative perceptions for people, even though their car's now completely different,
That issue, I've seen, I think China tried to deal with it partially, and also with this charging issue, was that one of the brands, I can't remember which one, was that you could drive into a equivalent of a petrol station and have the battery drop out from the bottom and have it replaced. And then that sort of partially solved this issue. So I can't remember which brand. I don't know if they're still doing it, but that seemed like a pretty good option if you wanted instant recharge as well.
Yeah, that is. I can't remember which brand it was, but there are, I think, a few brands that have trialed that, and I think it's really just too hard.
It is. to scale. It's hard to scale, I think.
Exactly right. There's been talks of like wireless charging while you drive, but imagine how expensive that would be. So yeah, there's a lot of thinking, but really all it comes down to is just, further improvements in technology. It's really all it is. And I guarantee you in 5 years' time, the EV will look very different to the EV today. But that doesn't mean that EVs today are going to be completely redundant and, you're just going to chuck them out like your dishwasher. Like, I don't think it's going to be like that. I think that there'll be ways to keep these on the road and probably make them even better, frankly.
Mm. I mean, a lot of people, think about this theory of the Europeans being really good compared to, Chinese brands, and we've seen lots of YouTube videos where people go like thump the door, right? How heavy is the door to close? I mean, do you think there is any shortcuts? Because at the end of the day, you're a strategy guy. At the end of the day, you either got one or two things. And Adam thinks that this is all about, the wank factor, as he likes to call it, and says the money that you're paying to German brands are all about their marketing dollars, right? In the same way a Ralph Lauren polo shirt costs $800 versus a Uniqlo $20 thing is all gone into marketing, not quality. I mean, do you think that the Chinese built EV is of the same build quality in of itself as an EQE or an iX3, or do you think there's something still missing? Because the answer can only be either of those two things. Either one's marked up their price so high, or there is a less build quality on the other side.
I'll put it this way: if you have a $100,000 German car and you put a $100,000 Chinese car next to it, I guarantee you that $100,000 Chinese car it will still triple the price in terms of its quality. I think, again, to my Cherry Tiggo 4, if you press a button on the steering wheel, it actually uses mechanical switches. If you go into a Nissan Qashqai, it uses membrane switches. And this is me getting all nerdy and technical because I'm a real tech lover as well. But it's a few cents extra, right? It's a few cents extra, probably 0.00 something. Obviously, it adds up though over time. But yes, I would have to agree overall that a lot of that money that you are spending, especially on like a premium brand, is 100% because that brand is premium and it's got brand cachet. But I mean, it works, right? Like we see it with everything in life. I mean, you own a Porsche, you could buy a Touareg and get 90% of the experience and spend half the price. But at the end of the day, you sit behind the Porsche steering wheel, you're like, I'm in a Porsche. It feels good. I can say that because I was driving a Porsche today. Felt great, Having said that, it's like, if you were looking at it from like a cost to produce, the cost would be no more for a Chinese car. In fact, it would probably be the same. They're just not making such a huge margin on it. And it does come back as well to, it comes from the top. So car companies will price a car. They actually, like when a car company, like any car company in Australia prices a car, they actually have to negotiate with their head office about what price that would be sold at. So, and that's the same as well for Chinese car companies. But I think the mandate given is different, which is like, we don't need to make tens of thousands of dollars on each car. We just need to make a few hundred, and we'll just sell a lot. And so that will make up for it, which also creates unrealistic expectations for these brands. Like, I think Geely, say they want to sell 50,000 cars, they'll tell that publicly, but their head office actually is like, well, no, you have to sell 100,000. And it never works out that way, but there's really strong expectations.
From the top. To sort of finish off, and obviously, I value the time of each of my guests and would love to, just briefly, talk about what services that you provide the public as well. Is if you were in an elevator with someone and you knew they were in the electric car market looking for an EV and they had clearly dismissed Chinese EVs, what's your sort of 30-second, 1-minute pitch to them to sort of convince them otherwise?
As in to convince them that they want one or they don't want one?
Or as in that they should consider it. Not that they necessarily should buy one at the end, but to consider it, not dismiss it.
Yeah. I would say the only thing you need to do is you go to Tesla, for example, you ask them for a vehicle, or Kia. Get a 24-hour loan from Kia. You take that Kia EV5, you drive to a BYD dealership and you say, I want to drive the BYD C-Line 7, please. As soon as you sit your bum in that BYD C-Line 7C, you're going to be like, okay, I get it now. The build quality, the way they drive, most of the time anyway. There's examples where that doesn't work, but you get into them and you honestly think you're in a far more expensive car. And if you just covered that badge up and you look around and you feel around and you play with the systems, you're going to very quickly realize that there is extreme value in these Chinese brands, which is, honestly, they speak for themselves. All you need to do is drive one. And there are bad ones, but there are really good ones as well. And as soon as you sit in those really good ones, you're going to, you're probably going to buy one. Like, that's the reality of it. Like I said, I bought one and I didn't think I would love it. But often I will just I'll have any press car I have. I had a Giulia Quadrifoglio. It was just so easy to get into my Cherry, have it auto lock for me after I left it, that I actually drove my Cherry more that week than I drove the Giulia Quadrifoglio. People are going to think I'm crazy, but as someone who gets in a lot of fast cars, the allure of that wears off. And sometimes you just want convenience, and that's what you get.
Fantastic. Yeah. Now, just to finish off, you can find Matt on YouTube, CarSauce, Sauce spelled SAUCE.
Yes.
But Matt, there's another sort of part of your business that I'd love for you to just talk about. It's sort of helping mums and dads source cars.
Yeah, exactly right. So we have a car buying service called CarSauce Buy. We have had huge success from it. Frankly, I didn't expect it, but essentially what we do is when you want pretty much any new car in Australia, you put in your details. We have a dedicated team of car buyers who go out there, negotiate on your behalf with car dealers so you don't have to. You can save your time. And then you get the best offers back. And then you can choose to accept any offer you want. You don't have to accept any offer. It is a totally free service for you because we charge the dealers a fixed fee. And because we charge them a fixed fee, we can go in literally the hardest to get the best price possible. So it's a service I've personally used myself to secret shop it, make sure that it was all okay. And it's frankly flawless. And that's why we've had thousands now of Aussies go and buy a car through CarSauce Buy, because it's just literally, I think, the best way to buy a new car. Perhaps not a Porsche, but anything else,
But why do you think? I think a lot of people don't know about these sort of car broking companies. I mean, is there any reason why anyone shouldn't use the car broker? It just seems to make a lot of sense to take the hassle out of it.
And literally, there is honestly zero reason, unless you just for some reason want that dealership experience. But most dealership experiences are terrible. Who the hell likes a salesperson? I've worked in sales before. We're the worst. So, no, you don't want that. You just want someone to go in, be a buyer's advocate and buy on your behalf, which is, like I said, I think the reason people don't know about it is because they just don't know about it. I think it's been really poorly marketed. The only marketing that we do is in every video I mention CarSauce Buy. And that's been enough for people to do it, and they've put their trust in us, which I thank them for. And it's extremely successful. Literally for everyone, it is extremely successful. We've had one negative experience, which was because we had a bad egg within the team, and that bad egg is gone, and that person still bought a car. So yeah, if you want the best prices possible and you don't want to negotiate and haggle, it's literally the best way to do it.
So everyone can simply just Google CarSauce Buy and you'll find Matt and his team to be able to help you. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. That was a great learning experience for me based on your experience. I think people shouldn't just dismiss Chinese EVs. There is an onslaught of them and you have to sort of sort through it. But at the end of the day, as you said, unless you test drive one, don't have the misconceptions that I guess what the media also likes to espouse.
Yeah, it's very easy to get caught up in the negativity, but I think if you have a look objectively at cars, you're going to be very pleasantly surprised, and they're not as malicious as you think. It's just a car, just like chill out.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Matt.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate it.
This podcast is not financial product advice and is intended to provide information only. It does not take into account the investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of any person. You should assess whether the information is appropriate for you and consider talking to a financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Any investment examples are for illustrative purposes only. The information is taken from sources which are believed to be accurate, but Simon Wu, Jonathan Wu, SWU Financial Planning, and Personal Financial Services Limited accept no liability of any kind to any person who relies on the information contained in the podcast. Unless expressly stated, none of the information should be taken as a recommendation. For more information, please visit www.simonwu.com.au.